Hi everyone, so in this particular week I want to talk a little bit about drum and bass production techniques for drum sounds, especially for those of you that are into this minimal drum bass sound. What I want to focus on is I want to focus on techniques that are not so apparent and techniques that can really enhance your production and which, you know, things that you can actually apply in the future and you can keep applying forever and ever and ever. So this is just a quick example. So if you listen to the drum beat, it's just tight, right? So it's got kick, hi-hat, snare. So let's just start with just a basic drum pattern. In fact, I'm just going to copy this across because I like it. It's simple, right? Typical pattern, as you can see here. So kick, basically hi-hats and snares, and that's it, right? So 2, 4. And the kick is a little bit off, so it's got a little bit more of like a wonkiness to it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to go into drum racks, go to drums, and then potentially just find one that already sounds kind of cool. Like you can just pre-hear them, as we know. That's already quite nice. I'm going to roll with that. So if we were to play that, it's going to sound like this. Right, so that's already sounding good, but obviously it's not playing the right sound. That's playing something else. So let's move that to that snare. Right, there you go. So what can we do with this? So obviously the problem with Ableton when you use this new drum kit is that it's going to be using this drum sampler. So we want to make sure that we are working in simpler for this, because there's a couple of techniques I'm going to show you have to do it simpler. So let's focus on that kick for a second. So let's set that to one shot. Remember as well, when you're playing with samples, one thing that's really, really important, right, if I zoom in a little bit, is the fact that you can sort of adjust the start point, right? That maybe gives a little bit more pluckiness. The other technique I'm going to show you is if you go over to simpler here, and we go all the way to light warping, we can set this to be complex pro, and this is really interesting because that can immediately tighten up the beat. You can even the actual kick drum, right? So you can set it for a number of beats, like 2 beats, right, or double, right? Obviously that sounds a little bit artificial, but you can really tighten it up by dividing it by 2, as you can see here at the bottom. So that's really clicky now, right? I mean, that would be like ultra clicky, but that's maybe too much. So let's go back one more. Maybe around there. The other thing that's interesting too is when you play with Complex Pro, you can potentially shift the pitch of the sample, and that can add a little bit of extra bite at the start of the note. And remember that in order to do this, you need to use Complex Pro. It's the one that's going to sound more or less the best. That can also be quite creative. So let's explore that for a minute. So if we go over here, and we play with the, you can see I'm setting up a very short decay, and let's just play around with the pitch envelope to see if we can get a little bit more bite at the start of the sample. You see what I mean? Maybe that's nice. There you go, somewhere around there sounds pretty decent to me. And the other thing that a lot of producers don't know about is obviously, you know, it's important to have like a spectrum analyzer so we can actually see what we're doing, because otherwise, you know, I mean, we can use our ears, right, which is fine, but also just kind of like having a look, because when you shorten the sample as well, then you might lose a little bit of low end, so you might need to compensate. As you can see, right, the sample is maybe traveling too far up, and potentially for kind of like a minimal drum and bass, we want a little bit more energy around here, just a little bit, about 50 hertz. The sweet spot tends to be around 80 hertz for the ultimate punch. So what I tend to suggest my students to do is to go and use a high pass filter, and then on the high pass filter I would say use something that's got a little bit of character, like the MS-20 for example, and then sort of like match the frequency to the lower denominator there. So let's try 80, and then increase the resonance until you hear the oomph coming through, right? Can you hear that? Before was a little bit flat. That's nice. Right, so that's one thing. Okay, the same thing of course can be done with the snare sound. So let's have a look at the snare sound that we've got here as well. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, let's have a listen to that snare again. Drum sampler to simpler, so we got a little bit more control. One shot, and that's got a little bit of reverb. I think I'm not sure. I'm just gonna play the sample as it is. Let's try also using warping, and again Complex Pro, just to get basically Complex Pro is going to follow the movement on the snare. It's really going to follow absolutely everything, right? It's going to follow all the difference in terms of like the volume at the start and the end, and it's going to keep the pitch more or less natural as well. Even if we were to transpose the snare, still going to retain the original characteristics of the snare. So let's try divide it by 2. Right, so as I suspected, there is a little bit of reverb in there. So let's have a look. And this is one thing that you might find with some of these Ableton packs as well. So yeah, you can see this reverb there. So let's kill it. Right, so remember that we can go into the device list and the chain list here. And then this is my return. So I'm just turning that off. Yeah, that's better. I don't want the reverb for now, right? We just want to tighten it up. So reverb can be confusing having reverb there, right? If we want to tighten up the snare sample. And then what we can also do is we can go and divide it by 2 here. And you can hear that's very much cleaner, right? With snare samples, you can see that this is the energy where it's hitting up. So again, if we wanted to add more energy to the low end of the snare, we can use again same technique with the high pass. Just bring it there, just add a little bit of resonance. And with the snare, it depends. You just have to explore it to see. I mean, that's maybe too much. That goes borderline kind of like neuro, right? So maybe let's go a little bit lower. That's about right. And let's use maybe like the MS-20. Yeah, that's cool. That works quite nicely indeed. Another technique that I thought I'd share that I have been sharing on Instagram as well is this. If we had a very short snare, I mean, let's have a listen to what it sounds like now. Yeah, that's cool. That sounds nice and punchy. Again, with snare samples, you can transpose it up and down here because we're using the Pro. It should sound fairly decent. I kind of prefer it like that. Let's hear that. Yeah, turn it up a little bit. Yeah, that's good, right? And of course, remember that we add in the low end. Right, so that gives a little bit more bite. Again, you can adjust the frequency as you see fit. Tends to work really well around 250 Hertz, thereabouts, for a really fat, chunky snare type sound. But the other thing I wanted to really show you is that we can apply a little bit more flavor to the sound just by introducing something else. And this can be really, really cool because the vocoder is one of the devices that's like highly underused in Ableton. And it's actually awesome because it's basically a noise generator. So if you feel that the snare has got the energy, but it doesn't have enough kind of like fizz, it doesn't have enough tail to it because maybe we shorten it quite a lot. I mean, you can shorten it even further, but divide it by 2 again. So that's really, really tight. That's maybe, I think that's that kind of like sweet spot, but we want a little bit of fizziness, right? It doesn't have fizziness on the top. So with the vocoder, we can turn it on and you can hear straight away this. Basically, as long as you use the noise as the carrier, then basically we can add noise onto the sound, right? With this, it's just, you know, I normally start with a dry wet 100% and then adjust the release. And then we can bring the dry wet until we hear the original snare. That's nice. And you can even do left, right. So the noise is kind of like stereo noise. So it really opens up the sound, which is really nice. And again, with this, if you want to kind of like change the character of the noise part of the snare, which is what we're doing with the vocoder right now, is we can play on with the formant, and that's gonna give us like a high pitch noise or low pitch noise. Look. Maybe there, a little bit higher. Cool, there we go. Let's bring it down a little bit. You see, it's subtle, right? But it makes a massive difference. And let's have a listen to that hi-hat. So the hi-hat, I think the hi-hat's okay as it is. I mean, let's do the same thing again from the drum sampler to simpler, right? And let's have a listen. Yeah, that's okay, but it sounds really boring, right? So two things I would suggest to try doing is obviously going to one shot, so place the full sample. Potentially we can try again the technique with Complex Pro to tighten it up a little bit. That's cleaner already. Then you can do a little bit of fade out to make it sound a little bit more natural. But it sounds a bit boring, so one thing I'm going to do is just randomize it a little bit. So we can go to the LFO here and we can randomize the pitch a little bit. Again, very, very subtle. You can even randomize the volume. But I think the MIDI itself already has got some velocity applies to it. Yeah, so I can see, yeah, you can see that the hi-hats themselves, they've got like velocity. And I've got the deviation right there to -54. So then the hi-hats sort of like deviate, so they're not always the same. So let's have a listen to that beat now. Cool, that sounds right. Let's adjust the levels, of course. I do feel the snare is a little bit too prominent. It's nice though. Potentially I could tighten it up a little bit further. Let's just close the release. Yeah, a little bit of that is nice. And let's maybe just bring the snare down a little bit in volume. There you go. And of course we can round it out a little bit by adding some effects. Like some of my favorite effects to add is obviously the drum bass. So that can give us a little bit more oomph if we want it. But the glue compressor can work really nicely. I'm just going to add it just to give it a little bit more of a slamming sound. And remember that with the drum bass, we can enhance the punch of the samples. One thing that you need to be very mindful of though in drum bass is like the signal can be quite hot going into drum bass and it's going to distort. So I always have the drum bass to like a trim of -12. Otherwise, if the trim is 0, you might start distorting the sound. See, that sounds kind of like a little bit distorted. Which can be good for drum bass though. Hold on, let's just bring it up a little bit. We can use a little bit of compression. But the thing with the compression is that it kind of like gets rid of the tightness. So let's just use a glue compressor instead afterwards. Let's use a little bit of transient shaping, see what it sounds like. Remember that if we go negative values on the transient, it's going to make it even tighter, right? So let's just play around with that. Maybe I prefer that. That sounds quite clean. The thing is, the problem with that is that it sort of feels like it lacks a little bit of punch. Sometimes I tend to use 2 drum basses. I know it sounds really silly, but basically 2, one after the other. So this is what I do. You're gonna laugh. So I put the first one with transient going forwards. So that adds the punch, and then I use the second one and I set the transient to negative values to tighten it up. There you go, that's nice. Again, be careful with the levels. It sounds a little bit crunchy, so use a trim. There you go, that's about right. The kick could be reshaped a little bit. I do find that it's got a little bit too much body to it. So sometimes, obviously, you know, we're going to be using our friend, the EQ. All right, this one. Okay, here we go. I think it's maybe because I boosted it and he's adding too much of this energy right there and it just sounds a little bit too crunchy. So I'm just going to soften it, but I'm going to use an EQ just to do that. So let's do that. Let's add it right next to the kick. And potentially with the EQ, we can reshape it a little bit more. I'm not going to remove the low end for now. Oh, I could do it. Sometimes when you do the low end cut, it kind of changes the sound. But I think it's okay like that. And let's just get rid of that. I don't like that. Too much. It's just like it's adding too much body to the kick. Yeah, that sounds a little bit cleaner. Let's maybe narrow it down. Let's just open up the, let's just bring a little bit more of the lows. I think that sounds cleaner. There's more techniques I'm going to show you in another video using multiband dynamics, but just for now, you can see the progress in here. Again, I'm just using my ears, I'm using headphones, so mine does sound perfect. Unfortunately, I monitor the speakers, but just to give you an idea of what I'm doing, right? So let's play that. And let's just add the final thing. 4 snares as well, if we're going to add more fizz. Remember, let's turn off the vocoder so you can hear it without. Massive difference, right? Huge difference. And yeah, sometimes good old EQ. Let's just give it a little bit more fizz. It's tricky, isn't it? Just a little bit. I'm just gonna add the touch. Yeah, that sounds about right. Obviously, we have to get the levels right and all that stuff, but so far so good. And then finally, let's add a glue compressor just to round the sound up. Okay. Normally with the glue compressor, I would say turn off the sidechain filter here. So basically, the glue compressor is reacting to the full signal, and generally, I like to keep the attack present. So if we do very short attack on the glue compressor is going to basically kill our kick. You see what I mean? That sounds kind of flat. Potentially we can tighten up the snare even further, but I think it's okay for now. But look what happens if we play around with the attack and actually allow the transient to punch through. Flat. Right, so let's maybe do like around 3 milliseconds. And we don't want the needle to move too much because that's going to slam it. That's too much. So I would say maybe like go up to like 5 dB, and then watch out for the clipping because that can kill your kick as well. So be mindful of that. If it's too yellow, it kills the kick. You can hear it. It's like, nah, not nice. Sometimes you can just turn it on and off. Yeah, that sounds good. Oh, you can even lower the range here, so it doesn't go above 5 dB, right? It's like super tight. When you do that, remember as well that you have to compensate with the volume. That's about, that sounds nice and controlled. Okay, so let's hear the bass. Yeah, and further from that, if you wanted to, what we can also do is we can add a little bit of natural reverb. I tend to suggest my students to use the hybrid reverb as well because it's the most transparent reverb and the most realistic one. I'm just going to roll with the made for drums just to give it a little bit of ambience. Set the high reverb to 100% wet. And choose one that adds coloration but not too crazy. That sounds like in a cave. Let's play around with different ones. I like that, but it's got like latency as well within it. I don't like that. That gives it like a nice kind of top end brightness. Potentially we can lower it a little bit. I do like the kind of sound it adds. It's not too bad. And then we just tighten it up, like shorten the decay, because we don't want the drums to kind of disappear, right? So shorten the decay here. It's kind of like the equivalent to make the room a little bit smaller. And then sort of blend it in. Just enough so it doesn't sound bouncy. Like if you listen to the kick, it sounds like it's like a bouncy ball kind of kick. We don't want that. We just want a little bit less, like a little bit more time, a little bit tighter, a little bit more control. That's nice. You see what I mean? It's just enough to make the drum sound a little bit more lively. See what I mean? Yeah, and then potentially you can try exploring the size just to see what it sounds like. So shorter size gives you a tighter sound. Longer size is just makes the sound kind of fatter. Somewhere around there, right? You can hear the effect. It's not overpowering, but it's just adding onto it. All right, guys. So this is the moment of truth. Obviously, I haven't really worked on the bass too much. It's just operator. Nothing major here. I haven't done any kind of crazy automations or anything like that. It's just a quick example. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, if you like the video, give us a like and leave us a comment as well if there's anything that you want me to cover as well in the future. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and on to the next video. Take care, everyone.